A small island in the west of Cape Town, South Africa is called Robben Island. This island is a cultural heritage of the world, but only 50 years ago it was a big prison. Then a prisoner came here and changed this island in South Africa forever. Today I am showing you the story of Nelson Mandela, the famous political prisoner of the 20th century. His name was not Nelson Mandela. His father had named him Ralala. Mandela was a troublemaker. But when he was 7 years old, his school teacher named him Nelson. But he also had a third name, Madiba. This name was inherited from his family, but not only he did not get the name, he also got the courage to stand against his father's oppression. Mandela was still a child when a British magistrate sued his father for the missing of an animal. In those days, the British occupied South Africa. Mandela's father was a landlord and also a criminal. He refused to face the British magistrate. The British government snatched his property from him. After some time, he left the world. Mandela had neither a landlord nor a father. Mandela was an orphan but not orphanless. His father had a friend, Unwavering, who was a guardian of the younger king of Thembu, Mandela's tribe. He adopted Mandela. Unwavering educated Nelson Mandela like his own son. But Mandela revolted against his own son. Unwavering married his son, Justice, to Nelson Mandela. Both the boys did not want to marry. So they fled to Johannesburg, South Africa. Mandela's harsh life began there. First he had to work in coal mines. Then he became a law firm employee. He was so poor that one of his acquaintances gave him a room in his house. He used to eat lunch from his house. For 5 years he had only one set of clothes. But even in these circumstances, he got a BA degree from the University of South Africa. After 2 years of law degree, he started a law practice in 1952. His financial situation was getting better. But the situation in South Africa was getting worse. The situation was getting worse. Although South Africa was liberated from British rule in 1931, 80% of blacks, Siafam, who were the natives of South Africa, had lived there for centuries. They were still deprived of human rights. 11% of them were white or of Samli color. Only 9% of whites, who were mostly from the Netherlands, Dutch, ruled these 91% blacks and others. These whites also came to South Africa from the Netherlands, which was called Holland in this time. Only 9% of whites, who were mostly from the Netherlands, Dutch, ruled these 91% blacks and others. These whites also came to South Africa from the Netherlands, which was called Holland in this time. But they had the idea of generation superiority. They were educated and supported by the British, which was a superpower at the time. When the British ruled South Africa, the Dutch government was controlled by these whites. They crushed the Siafam and other people of the same color, who were 91% but less educated. In this period, the condition of the Siafam Africans was that their hospitals, buses, trains, hotels, and accommodation were all separate from the whites. Each Siafam had to keep an identification pass with him. And a permit had to be issued for the Siafam to travel to another area. It was like someone needed a visa to travel to his own country. In these circumstances, Mandela did what most of his country's youth were doing or wanted to do. He started fighting for his rights on the streets. For the first time, he took to the streets in 1943 when the bus fare in his area increased. The fare was 5 pence, more than 4 pence. 10,000 people took to the streets against the increased fare, including Mandela. The public boycotted the bus service for 9 days and all the buses in the area were empty. 9 days later, the bus company reduced the fare and the Siafam won. The Siafam had reduced the fare, but in 1948, elections were held in South Africa. The Siafam were not allowed to contest the elections or cast their votes. The Siafam were not allowed to contest the elections or cast their votes. The Siafam were not allowed to contest the elections or cast their votes. The Siafam were not allowed to contest the elections or cast their votes. The Siafam were not allowed to contest the elections or cast their votes. The Siafam were not allowed to contest the elections or cast their votes. The Siafam were not allowed to contest the elections or cast their votes. The Siafam were not allowed to contest the elections or cast their votes. The Siafam were not allowed to contest the elections or cast their votes. The white man should always be the boss. Our people, our language, and our land. The religious group was also giving fatwas to support the Siafam. The religious group also issued fatwas in support of the party that God has made white Africans better, and black Africans less. The National Party won the election and made its own government with the support of its religious supporters. The party's leader, Mellon, said in his victory speech that South Africa is once again ours. The same National Party was later called the Apartheid Party. Apartheid literally means to be separate. The National Party's manifesto was that it would make black Africans completely alone. And it did so after coming to power. So it was known as apartheid. The National Party or Apartheid Party ruled for 46 years, till 1994. To the courts to cover the cases. Mandela openly challenged the apartheid government in front of the media. When he went to the court for the first time, he wore the traditional African jungle dress. This was an open expression of the rebellion against the Western civilization. Then he stood in the court and said that he did not follow the laws of this country. He did not get a representative in the parliament and he did not expect justice from the court. Mandela's words were reported in the press all over the world. Mandela was sentenced to 5 years in prison for the case of the strike in passport. When the court heard the verdict, many people in the court began to cry. Mandela called out to them, Amandala. This word means strength or courage in the African language. The second case against Mandela, which was to overturn the throne of the government and the blasts, it seemed that Mandela and his 7 colleagues would be sentenced to death. But Mandela and his colleagues were sentenced to life imprisonment. After 2 cases of imprisonment, Mandela and his colleagues were imprisoned in Robben Island. Mandela and his companions were sentenced to life imprisonment. After 2 years of imprisonment, Mandela and his companions were taken to Robben Island. They were imprisoned there for 18 years. Mandela was subjected to the most severe mental torture in this jail. He was only allowed to meet his wife after 6 months. His letters were censored. The limit was that he was not allowed to attend his mother and son's funeral. Mandela and his companions were forced to break stones in jail. He was also tried twice for murder. The secret agency of South Africa sent an agent as a warden in jail. Mandela was tempted to escape. Mandela understood that he was being conspired to kill him. He refused to do it. The second attempt was that Mandela and his companions were taken to a dentist in Cape Town. They were left alone in a room. They were also removed from their handcuffs. The window of the room was also kept open. It meant the ground was absolutely clear. But one of Mandela's companions realized that this was a government scheme. So they did not run. On one hand, the government was trying to kill Mandela. On the other hand, the MK and the African National Congress were also planning to get him out. One of these plans was to land a military helicopter in Robben Island. Mandela was to be taken to an embassy in Cape Town. Mandela was to get political asylum there. But this plan also did not work. After 18 years in Robben Island, Mandela was transferred to the Polismore jail in Cape Town in 1982. After 18 years, this was the first time he got good food in place of jail food. 6 years later, he was shifted to Worcester Prison in 1988. During this time, Mandela got better food in treatment facilities. After 18 years, the reason for good treatment from Mandela was the global pressure on South Africa. In 1986, the Commonwealth imposed restrictions on the import of air travel, investment, tourism, coal and iron from South Africa. The situation in the country was getting worse. In June 1986, millions of people protested. Bomb blasts were also going on, in which the police were being targeted. On one hand, the government was hesitating. On the other hand, Mandela's thoughts were also softened by the long imprisonment. Now he was ready to talk to the government. After leaving Robben Island, he contacted the government himself and the conversation began. When the news reached Mandela's party, they were worried. Mandela's partner, Oliver Tambo, smuggled a letter to Mandela in jail. He also demanded an answer from the government on the Mbena deal. But Mandela replied that the goal of the conversation was only to open the door of negotiation between the party and the government. It was not a deal. During this time, Mandela also suffered a physical shock. The government had imprisoned him in such jails where he was very wet. And due to this, his lungs were filled with water till 1988. He had TB, but this was only at the initial stages. After the surgery, 2 liters of water were removed from his lungs. 2 liters of water was taken out of the farm. Mandela was acquitted and his talks with the government were successful. The white farm government of South Africa agreed to give their rights to the black farmers. President F.W. de Klerk imposed a ban on more than 30 communities on February 2, 1990. 9 days later, on February 11, 1990, the historic day came when Nelson Mandela was released. On February 11, at around 4 p.m., Nelson Mandela was released from prison in the form of a small caravan. 10,000 days, 27 years later, Mandela was now a free man. The crowd was so huge that it was necessary to change the route to Cape Town. But there were more people in Cape Town than this. People surrounded the car and started banging its windows. Mandela was taken to the city hall for a speech where he had to read his written speech. It was found that he had forgotten his glasses in the jail. But his wife, Winnie, had the same number of glasses. So he borrowed glasses from his wife and read his speech. In April 1994, a historic election was held in South Africa. The African National Congress won 252 seats in the parliament of 400 seats. In contrast, the National Party of de Klerk got only 82 seats. But history showed that the same 2 communities had been fighting for 40 years. They formed a government together. Nelson Mandela became the first president of the Black Farm. De Klerk became the vice president. Both had won the Nobel Peace Prize. On May 10, Nelson Mandela took the presidency. He was the same man whose father had taken away his property from the whites. Today he had deprived the whites of their rule. But instead of taking revenge, Nelson Mandela said he would build a world where everyone could thrive. Even after becoming president, Mandela did not forget his jail. When President Clinton came to South Africa, Mandela showed him the Robben Island. He also showed him the cell where he was imprisoned. Clinton praised Mandela a lot, but there was a problem between the US and Mandela. US President Reagan had included Mandela's party in the watch list of terrorism in the 80s. And obviously Mandela was also a part of this watch list as a party leader. This was the reason Mandela had to take special permission to enter the US by 2008. Then the US passed a new law and removed Mandela from the US watch list. Mandela's term of presidency ended in 1999. On March 29, 1999, he made the last address to the parliament. He said he hoped this journey of success would continue and every generation would have a chance to progress. At this time, the parliamentarians sang a song for Mandela. Mandela visited Pakistan twice in 1992 and 1999. He also visited the tomb of Quaid-e-Azam. He was awarded the highest honor of Pakistan in 1992. He visited Pakistan twice and also visited the shrine of Quaid-e-Azam. He was awarded the highest honor of Pakistan in 1992. He also addressed the joint session of the Pakistani parliament in 1999. It is said that Mandela was a fan of Quaid-e-Azam. He also wrote in 1995 that Quaid-e-Azam's life is a guide for those who are fighting against the rule of a particular group. Mandela also liked Gandhi but did not agree with the philosophy of nonviolence. This is the reason he himself left nonviolence and took up the path of war for freedom. Mandela also left his wife Minnie Mandela before leaving politics. Yes, the reason for the fight between husband and wife was that Minnie Mandela fell in love with a lawyer who was half his age. In March 1992, a letter of his was also published in the Manzuri AM which he wrote to his boyfriend. Minnie was also accused of having a problem with the party funds. Mandela also complained that Minnie did not even talk to him. So in 1996, when Mandela was still a president, he took a divorce from his wife. 3 years after leaving his wife, Mandela also left politics. He built a house in a Bai village, Kiono, where some of his family members still live. Mandela not only looked after his grandsons and granddaughters but also fed their children. By 2013, more than 30 people were present in Mandela's house. Interestingly, in 1998, at the age of 80, he also married a politician of Mozambique, Greka Mitchell. Mandela spent a good time with his family, but with time his health deteriorated. The disease in Mandela's lungs, infection, followed him till his last breath. In 2013, Mandela fell very ill. He spent 3 months in hospital where the lung infection spread despite the doctor's efforts. The world prayed for him, but on December 5, 2013, he died at the age of 95. Mandela's dead body was taken to Kiono from Johannesburg. The coffin was wrapped in South African flag and buried in the family cemetery. Mandela's grave is 3.5 kilometers from Kiono village. There is a museum in Kiono named after Mandela. Mandela Foundation is also working to spread the philosophy of equality of Mandela. In its lectures, people like Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, and Bill Gates come. Mandela is also a symbol of revolution and change in the world.